let's talk about finishing the table. We have two different styles of finishes and then two different types of covers. So the first type of finish, paint, and I have here a let's swirl the paintbrush all over the place versus let's apply very carefully in the direction of the grain, and you can see we get much better coverage with the direction of the grain and it just looks nicer. The point of paint is to make the woodworking look good when you have a few mistakes and you want to cover them up. So if you have a few goofs in your joints and you don't want to highlight the goofs in your joints, you pick paint, and if you do a good job painting, then it can look nice. If you've done a very nice job with your joints and you want to show off the wood grain and the joints and the fact that you've done a good job with your joints, you can go with a stain, and a stain will show off the wood grain. And within the stain, you can also go with a pre-stain or a no pre-stain. And if you notice two things about this, with the no pre-stain, it's darker than the pre-stain, and also there's more variation light to dark in the no pre-stain because there are places in the wood where the stain is going to soak in more. What pre-stain does is it smooths that out so that there's less wild variation, there's going to be less blotchiness. And I like a little bit of stain, but I also like not too much stain. I don't want to get a lot of blotchiness on my table, so I'm going to go with a pre-stain all over and pick a color, and I picked these three colors. We have a variety of stains that are reddish, we have a variety of stains that are brownish, and then black cherry is one of the stains that's kind of gloopy. It's very gel-like. It's kind of like Jell-O almost. And people look at the color and say, oh, that's a great color, I like that color, and then they open the can and they go to stir it and it's all gloopy and then they get scared. So I wanted to use this one to show that it can turn out very, very nicely. You just have to be careful about wiping it off just like any other stain. Apply in the direction of the grain, let it sit for a second, and then wipe it off. So I'm going to be going with a pre-stain, and then I'm going to pick a stain color on top of that. And then once that has dried, then we have two types of polyurethane that will help protect it even further from nicks, dings, and water spills. We've got a satin finish and we've got a glossy finish. And here, I'll tilt this back and forth and maybe you can see that the glossy has great shininess. Now, I also have here water thin, since we're using water-based, water thinned. If we had oil-based, this would be mineral spirits thinned. And what we can do, let's put the glossy right next to each other. You should notice that for the glossy, I can see it here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. There are brush strokes that you can see very visibly in the gloss. It's very thick and gloopy polyurethane that we have. If you thin it with water, it's not as thick and gloopy, and the brush strokes largely disappear. It's much smoother. It's still glossy, but there isn't the same brush stroke variation that really gets highlighted. That's the danger of gloss. I do like a glossy finish, but you have to be very careful not to show your brush strokes. The satin, and I did it exactly the same way, back and forth, but the satin does not show off the brush strokes in the same way that gloss does. So what I'm probably going to be doing is thinning it with a little bit of water so that it's not gloopy polyurethane, the gloss for the tabletop, and then satin for the body of my table. So let's take a look at doing that. Before you apply finish, it's good to get all the dust off from your own sanding and everybody else's sanding. When you got 20 people in the room sanding, there's going to be a lot of dust floating around, even with the windows open and the fan going to move it out. Still got to get rid of the dust, and then we'll apply the pre-stain. All right, let that dry for a few minutes, and then you can apply the pre-stain with a brush, not a paper towel. All right, for pre-staining, we're going to need to stir it, a stirring rod, and then pour in a little cup so that we don't spill it. It's very watery, it's very thin, so it will spray all over the place easily. And then we'll apply it with a brush with the grain. Time to wipe it off and then let it dry before we stain it. Alright, pre-stain applied. So the next thing that the pre-stain directions say to do is remove excess conditioner that has not penetrated the wood with a cloth. Did that. Lightly sand the surface with fine grade sandpaper, at least 220 grit, to smooth any raised grain. Remove all sanding dust. All right, so that's the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to sand off this to re-smooth it, because one of the things that the pre-stain will do is raise the grain up a little bit, and it needs to be knocked back down. So we'll sand that down again, re-smooth it. Move dust, so wipe it off. You don't want dust included in the stain. Alright, that feels nice and smooth again. So now we can take our stain, and I've chosen Vermont Maple. I like that look. Nice reddish tinge. Alright, applying the stain. Apply stain with one of the following, and I've chosen foam brush. Allow stain to penetrate no longer than 3 minutes. So wipe it on, wipe it off. Don't let it sit there. It's not paint. Paint sits on top and covers the surface. Stain soaks into it. Anything that doesn't soak in, you got to get rid of and take it off. Remove stain with a clean cloth. We don't have much in the way of clean cloths, but we've got a lot of paper towels. Wipe in the direction of the grain, using light to medium pressure to achieve the even stain color. So when applying this, the grain is going along the length of the tabletop. Brush or foam pad should be going along the length of the tabletop. And I'm not interested in darkening the color, so I won't be doing that. Oh, I need a can key. As usual, opening the stain reveals it needs to be stirred. So we'll stir it. Oof. All right, so you can see a little bit of blotchiness there. We've got some red tint right there, and then we have some pale coloring there. So we're going to need to stir this up a fair amount. And then when stirred, that looks reasonably well stirred, looks even color. We're going to use one of our plastic cups and put the stain into the cup so that we're not dipping the bristle brush directly into the stain can. And then we can put the lid back on the can so that we can protect it from contamination and spills. All right, this should be enough to be going on with. And we're going to start by testing it out on an unobtrusive corner of our table. So I've turned the table down here, and we're going to start on the underside corner there, basically the armpit. And if I don't like the coloring of the stain, then maybe I'll switch. But at least it'll be in a spot that nobody's likely to look unless they're really looking. All right, so a little bit here, just a little bit. And we'll take it off because I just want a light stain. All right, I think that's pretty good. A little more off on this. That looks reasonably even, and I like the red tinge, so I think I'll go with it, and I'll do the rest of it with that. All right, I got the insides and the top of the shelves, and oh, I need to do that one, and all of that from the little bit that I had in here. So now it's time to add more. Probably have to restir. Nope, that's the wrong one. That's the pre-stain that I had out to redirections. Restir a little bit. All right, 10 scoops should be sufficient for a bit more. Since I started with the underside, and I also need to do the inside of these guys, let's tilt this down and get at the underside now. All right, stained. Now it needs to dry completely and finish curing, and then we'll put polyurethane on it. Let's talk about polyurethaning. This will add a further layer of protection to the project and the wood beyond staining. Not strictly necessary, except that for the top that you'll be putting things on and it will get dinged, I would definitely put polyurethane on the top. As long as you're using this inside, the sides and the shelves, maybe not quite as necessary, but I'm still going to do it. For the sides, shelves, and feet, I'm going to use this satin, and then for the top, I'm going to use this gloss. And for both of these guys, I'm going to thin it out, since we're using water-based, I'm going to thin it out with a little bit of water, and then do multiple layers, and that will help get a smoother finish when we're all said and done, because both of these guys are a little bit gloopy. And therefore, getting a smooth finish with this gloopiness, this one's not too bad, but that one's very, very thick. It says it's 3X, so it starts out very thick and it needs to be thinned out a little bit to get a nice smooth finish. So stir it up, as always, add it to our little cup, and then add in a little water and stir that up before we start putting it on. And I'll be doing the sides of the shelves with the satin, and again the top with the glossy. I'm not measuring precisely here, I just want it a little bit thinner than it comes out of the can. And really the main thing for thinning this is how patient are you. The more patient you are, the thinner you make it, and the more coats that you put on. If you're less patient, maybe you don't thin this at all. Again, just as with the stain, we want to take long strokes. We don't want to show off strokes. What we want to do is show off the wood, and if you have your strokes going all swirly and everything, you're showing off your brush strokes, not the wood. We want to take long strokes in the direction of the grain, and we want to catch drips as they happen, as much as possible. That first shelf that I did is almost dry already. That is a benefit of thinning it out, is that it tends to dry faster also. So, might be able to put another coat on this pretty soon. First coat is dried, let's put on a second coat. Recommended 3 coats minimum. Final step. 2 coats of polyurethane on both the top, that's going to be gloss, and frame and shelves, that's satin. So last step is very light sanding and then 1 more coat. So for very light sanding, we can take some of our 150 grit sandpaper, take a 1/4 of a sheet, cut it, wrap it around a palm hand-sized block so that we can get in the corners, and also make sure that we're not over sanding and gouging, so we're not going to want to use a random orbital sander for this. Very light passes, and then we're going to want to wipe it off to get all the dust off, because we want to make sure that we have as little dust as possible beneath that final coat. So mineral spirits to gather that up, and then dry it off, and then last coat. So let's go. As you're sanding, you should notice some light white dust. So we've got some white dust there, some white dust there. If you don't see white dust, if it's kind of gummy, then you probably should wait a little while longer before you start sanding. That white dust is a sign that your polyurethane has dried sufficiently, and you can go to your last step. So we will get our mineral spirits, get rid of that white dust, and then dry it off, and put our last coat on.
The end of a thing is better than its beginning, and the patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. If you'd followed the directions and persevered through doing this, you now have a table that you can use. It is no longer a workpiece, but a product.